The morning sun cast long shadows across the worn linoleum floor of their cramped apartment. Michael Bennett sat at the kitchen table, a cup of lukewarm coffee growing cold between his calloused hands as he stared at the empty wallet beside his plate. Inside that leather billfold, cracked and faded from years of honest work, lay two $20 bills and a 10. $50, the sum total of what remained after rent, groceries, and keeping their 15-year-old Honda running long enough to get him to work and back. Rebecca's wedding ring sat in a small velvet box next to the wallet, catching the morning light with a gentle gleam that reminded him of her smile. He'd been carrying it with him for 3 months now, unable to bring himself to pawn it, but knowing the time was coming when he'd have no choice. The ring represented everything they'd built together, everything they'd lost when cancer took her 18 months ago, and everything he was failing to provide for their son Oliver. 9-year-old Oliver sat across from him, methodically eating his cereal while sketching in a notebook he'd found at a garage sale. The boy had inherited his mother's artistic eye and his father's steady hands, creating elaborate drawings of houses with big yards, tree houses, and rooms where a person could spread out without bumping into walls. He drew what he dreamed of: space permanence, a place that felt like home rather than a temporary stop between disappointments. "Dad, Mrs. Peterson says some kids at school are going camping this weekend. Real camping, with tents and everything." Michael set down his coffee cup, carefully recognizing the careful way his son brought up things they couldn't afford. Oliver had learned not to ask directly for things, a survival skill no 9-year-old should need to develop. "That sounds like fun, buddy. What kind of camping? The kind where you sleep outside and cook over a fire and don't have to hear Mr. Reynolds upstairs practicing his trumpet at midnight." Oliver's pencil moved across the paper, adding windows to a house that looked remarkably like the ones they'd drive past in the nicer neighborhoods across town. "I told her we probably couldn't go because we don't have camping stuff." The weight of those words settled into Michael's chest like a stone. Oliver had stopped asking for things months ago, but he hadn't stopped wanting them: the camping trip, the baseball glove he'd admired in the sporting goods store, the bicycle with working brakes that would let him ride safely with the other kids. Oliver had learned to transform wishes into quiet observations, protecting his father from the pain of saying no. Michael worked as a mechanic at Carson's Auto Repair, a job that barely covered their basic expenses, but allowed him the flexibility to pick Oliver up from school each day. Tom Carson was a decent man who understood that single fathers sometimes needed to leave early for parent-teacher conferences or stay home with sick children. The pay wasn't much, but the understanding was worth more than money some days. Their apartment was a study in making do with less. The living room held a second-hand sofa that doubled as Michael's bed, a coffee table made from milk crates and a piece of wood, and a television that worked only if you held the antenna just right. Oliver's bedroom was barely large enough for a twin bed and a dresser, but the boy had made it his own with drawings taped to the walls and a collection of interesting rocks arranged on the windowsill. Every morning, Michael would wake to the sound of Oliver getting himself ready for school, a level of independence that impressed and saddened him in equal measure. The boy would make his own lunch from whatever was available, pack his backpack without being reminded, and wait by the door for his father to drive him to school. At pickup time, Oliver would be waiting with a smile and stories about his day, carefully avoiding any mention of field trips, school supplies, or activities that cost money. In the evenings, they would work on homework together at the kitchen table, Oliver's math problems spread out next to Michael's bills and budgets. Sometimes Oliver would ask about his mother, and Michael would share stories about Rebecca's laugh, her terrible cooking, her way of making every small moment feel special. They would look through photo albums when the sadness felt manageable, remembering birthday parties and Christmas mornings when money hadn't been quite so tight and the future had seemed full of possibilities. The idea of buying property, any property, had seemed like an impossible dream until Michael heard about the county tax auction. Properties with unpaid taxes would be sold to the highest bidder, sometimes for remarkably small amounts. He'd driven by the courthouse several times, watching other people bid on land and buildings, wondering what it would feel like to own something, to have a place where no landlord could raise the rent or force them to move. On a whim born of desperation and hope, he'd picked up the auction list from the county clerk's office. Most of the properties were far beyond his means, houses worth tens of thousands of dollars, with back taxes in the thousands. But near the bottom of the list, he found it, a cabin on 2 acres of wooded land, Back taxes of $50 minimum bid $50. The property description was brief and not encouraging. Structure in severe disrepair. No utilities connected access, road in poor condition. But it was land, it was ownership. It was the possibility of giving Oliver a place to call home, a place where they could build something together instead of just surviving from month to month. That night, Oliver had found him studying the auction listing at the kitchen table. "What's that, Dad?" "Just something I'm thinking about, buddy. Remember how you're always drawing houses with big yards?" Oliver nodded, moving closer to look over his father's shoulder. "Well, there's this place. Just a cabin. Probably needs a lot of work, but it's got 2 whole acres of woods trees to climb, space to run around, maybe even a place to build a treehouse." The hope that flickered in Oliver's eyes was almost painful to watch. Could we really buy it? Maybe. It's not much to look at now, but sometimes the most broken places hold the biggest possibilities. Oliver had spent the next 3 days drawing pictures of their cabin, imagining how they might fix it up, where they might plant a garden, how they might clear a space for a workshop, where his dad could fix cars and he could build things. The drawings showed a place transformed by love and hard work, a place where a father and son could create something beautiful together. On the morning of the auction, Michael had dressed in his best shirt and clean boots, the $50 folded carefully in his wallet alongside Rebecca's ring. Oliver had wanted to come along, but Michael explained that auctions were serious business, boring for kids. The truth was, he couldn't bear to have Oliver witness his disappointment if someone else outbid him, or if the cabin turned out to be even worse than described. As they prepared to leave for school that morning, Oliver had given him a drawing of the two of them standing in front of a restored cabin, both of them smiling, a tire swing hanging from a massive oak tree. "For luck, Dad." Now sitting in his truck outside the courthouse, Michael unfolded that drawing and studied it again. In Oliver's imagination, they looked happy. They looked like they belonged somewhere. They looked like a family that had found their way home. The auction was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. Around him, other bidders were prepared for the day's business, investors with calculators and clipboards, contractors evaluating potential projects, families like his own hoping for a miracle. He touched the 50 in his wallet and thought about the ring box in his pocket, the backup plan he prayed he wouldn't need. Sometimes he thought the biggest leap of faith happens not when you're strong enough to succeed, but when you're too desperate to give up. Today would be one of those days. The county courthouse steps buzzed with the quiet energy of people hoping to change their lives with a single bid. Michael found himself among a modest crowd of maybe 30 people, each clutching auction sheets and wearing expressions that ranged from confident calculation to desperate hope. He recognized his own expression in the latter group, the families and individuals who saw this auction not as an investment opportunity, but as their one chance at ownership. The auctioneer, a weathered man named Carl Hendress, who'd been conducting these sales for 15 years, climbed onto a makeshift platform with a portable microphone. His voice crackled to life, cutting through the morning air with the practiced rhythm of someone who understood that behind every bid was someone's dream or someone's last resort. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting with the commercial properties and working our way down to the residential and rural listings. Please have your bidder numbers ready, and remember that all sales are final cash or certified check only." Michael's property was number 47 on a list of 52. He watched as houses, empty lots, and small commercial buildings went to investors with deep pockets and quick decisions. A gas station with environmental issues sold for $12,000. A house with foundation problems went for $8,000. Each successful bid represented someone's new beginning or business venture, but also reminded Michael how outclassed he was in this world of real estate speculation. As the morning wore on, his palms grew damp despite the cool October air. The $50 in his wallet felt increasingly inadequate as he listened to bids climb into the thousands. When they reached property number 40, he felt his heart begin to race. Number 41, residential lot on Maple Street, back taxes $850 minimum, bid $850. Number 42, movable home on leased land, back taxes $600 minimum, bid $600. Each announcement brought him closer to the moment that would either change their lives or confirm that some dreams were simply too expensive for people like him. Number 47, Carl's voice announced, and Michael felt the ground seem to shift beneath his feet. Rural property, 2.3 acres. Includes structure described as cabin. Back taxes, $50. Minimum bid, $50. A murmur rippled through the crowd. $50 was unusually low even for a property in poor condition. Several bidders flipped through their sheets trying to locate the listing they might have overlooked. This property is located on Pine Ridge Road, approximately 12 miles east of town. Access is via unpaved road. Structure reported in severe disrepair with no utilities connected. Buyer responsible for any environmental or structural issues. Carl's description was thorough and discouraging. Do I have an opening bid of 50? Michael's hand trembled as he raised it. His bidder number 63 felt heavy in his grip. I have $50 from bidder 63. Do I have 70? The seconds stretched like hours. Michael scanned the crowd, expecting someone to raise their hand to outbid him with casual ease. But the other bidders were consulting their papers, many shaking their heads. A cabin in severe disrepair, with no utilities and difficult access, wasn't attractive to most investors. $50 from bidder 63, going once, going twice. Carl's gavel hovered in the air. Sunvai called a voice from the back. Michael's stomach dropped as he turned to see a man in a clean work shirt and new boots. Someone who looked like he flipped houses for a living. Carl nodded. I have 75. Do I have 100? This was it. Michael had exactly $50. He couldn't go higher. His dream was about to end, 25 short of success. He looked down at the drawing Oliver had given him that morning, the picture of them smiling in front of their cabin, and felt something break inside his chest. Then he remembered Rebecca's ring. His hand moved to his pocket, feeling the small velvet box. The ring was worth at least 300, maybe more. He could bid higher, win the property, and deal with pawning the ring afterward. But selling Rebecca's ring meant letting go of the last physical piece of their marriage, the last tangible connection to the woman who had made them a family. He called out, his voice steadier than he felt. Carl's eyebrows rose slightly. I have 100 for bidder 63. Do I have $125? The house flipper was studying his auction sheet more carefully now, probably reassessing the property's potential. The silence stretched for 30 seconds, then a full minute. Hunt from bidder 63, going once, going twice. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo off the courthouse walls. Sold to bidder 63 for $100. The applause that followed was polite and brief, the kind given to any successful transaction. But to Michael, it sounded like thunder. He stood frozen for a moment, unable to process that he had actually won something, that he was now a landowner, that he had just purchased Oliver's future for the price of a dinner at a decent restaurant. The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork, signatures, in the surreal process of handing over Rebecca's wedding ring as collateral while he arranged payment. The county clerk was patient and thorough, explaining his rights and responsibilities as the new owner, providing him with property maps and contact information for utility companies. Congratulations, Mr. Bennett, she said, as she handed him the deed and a set of keys that looked like they'd been cut sometime in the 1980s. You're now the proud owner of 2.3 acres and whatever structures are on the property. The previous owner was a gentleman named Walter Harrison, who lived there until the mid-1980s. Property's been abandoned since then. Michael stared at the keys, old tarnished brass, with the kind of weight that suggested they'd opened many doors over many years. One appeared to be for the cabin itself, while the other was smaller purpose unknown. The rusty key ring was simple and practical, the choice of someone who valued function over appearance. As he walked to his truck, deed and keys in hand, the reality of what he'd done began to settle in. He owned land. He owned a home, however broken it might be. He had given Oliver Roots a place that belonged to them, a foundation on which they could build whatever came next. But he'd also committed them to a project that might be beyond their means to complete. What if the cabin was truly uninhabitable? What if the cost of repairs exceeded what they could manage? What if he'd just spent their last 100 on a problem too big to solve? The drive to pick up Oliver from school passed in a haze of excitement and terror. When he saw his son waiting by the school entrance, backpack slung over one shoulder, and that careful smile that had learned not to expect too much, Michael felt his doubts dissolve into determination. Oliver climbed into the passenger seat and immediately noticed his father's expression. Dad, you look different. What happened? Michael held up the keys, watching Oliver's eyes widen as understanding dawned. We got it, buddy. We got our cabin. The joy that spread across Oliver's face was worth every dollar, every doubt, every risk. For the first time in 18 months, his son looked like a child who believed in possibilities again. Can we see it? Can we go there right now? Michael looked at the clock on the dashboard. 3:30. They had maybe 3 hours of daylight, left enough time to drive out to their property and get their first look at what they'd bought. Let's go home, Michael said. And for the first time since Rebecca died, the word home referred to something that actually belonged to them. The dirt road to their property turned out to be more of a suggestion than an actual road. Pine Ridge Road started as cracked asphalt at the main highway, transitioned to gravel after the first mile, and devolved into two tire tracks separated by a ridge of weeds and saplings for the final stretch. Michael's Honda bounced and scraped over roots and stones, the undercarriage protesting with metallic complaints that made him wince. "This is like a real adventure," Oliver said, gripping his door handle as they navigated around a fallen branch. His excitement was infectious, transforming what could have been concerns about accessibility into the thrill of exploration. After 20 minutes of careful driving, the trees opened into a small clearing, and there it was, their cabin. Michael stopped the car, and both of them sat in silence, taking in their first real look at what they'd bought. The structure stood like a forgotten memory in the center of the clearing, partially hidden by 20 years of aggressive vine growth. What had once been a modest log cabin now appeared to be wearing a green sweater of ivy Virginia creeper and wild grapevines that had claimed the wall's roof and most of the windows. The front porch sagged at one corner where a support post had rotted through and several roof shingles had surrendered to time and weather, leaving dark patches that promised leaks. But it was theirs. Oliver was the first to speak. "It's bigger than I thought it would be." Michael studied the structure with his mechanic's eye for problems and potential. The log walls appeared solid despite the vegetation, and the stone chimney stood straight and intact. The cabin was perhaps 24 feet wide and 30 feet deep, with what looked like a small addition on the back that might have been a bedroom or storage room. "What do you think, Buddy? Still excited about our new home?" Oliver opened his door and stepped out, his sneakers crunching on fallen leaves and twigs. "It's perfect, Dad. It just needs some help." They approached the front porch, cautiously testing the floorboards before putting their full weight down. The wood was weathered gray but felt solid beneath their feet. Michael fitted the larger brass key into the front door lock, surprised when it turned easily, despite its age. The door swung open with a groan of hinges that hadn't moved in years, revealing the interior of their cabin. Afternoon sunlight slanted through gaps in the vegetation covering the windows, creating a green-filtered twilight that made everything seem underwater. The main room was larger than their apartment's living room, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and built-in shelves flanking it on both sides. The wooden floors were warped in places where rain had leaked through the roof, but they appeared to be solid hardwood beneath the dust and debris. A small kitchen occupied the back corner with cabinets that had weathered the years better than expected, and a window that would offer a view of the woods once the vines were cleared. "Look, Dad," Oliver said, pointing to the back of the main room. "There's stairs." A narrow staircase led to what must be a loft area, though the upper level was too dark to see clearly. To the right of the stairs, a doorway led to the addition they'd seen from outside. Oliver was already exploring, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. He peered into the back room and called out, "There's another bedroom back here, and it has its own window." Michael moved through the space, slowly mentally cataloging the work they'd need to do. Clear the vines, repair the roof, check the foundation, install electricity and plumbing. When he listed it that way, the project seemed overwhelming, but standing in the filtered light of their own cabin, breathing air that smelled of old wood, and growing things, the work felt like possibility rather than burden. "Dad, come here," Oliver called from near the fireplace. He was kneeling beside the built-in shelves, running his hands along the wood grain. "Some of these boards are loose." Michael joined his son and examined the shelving. Sure enough, several of the shelf boards could be lifted out, revealing gaps where smaller items might have been stored. As Oliver lifted one of the longer boards, something crackled beneath it. "There's paper stuck under here," Oliver said, working the board free carefully. What emerged were several sheets of aged paper, yellowed at the edges and covered with handwriting and faded blue ink. The pages appeared to be journal entries dated from the mid-1980s and written in a careful, educated hand. Michael held the pages up to catch the filtered light coming through the windows and read the first entry aloud. March 15th, 1987. The work is nearly complete. 23 years of research, and I believe I have finally solved the fundamental problems that have plagued the field since Tesla's early experiments. The applications are extraordinary, but I fear the implications if this knowledge falls into the wrong hands. I have decided to document everything and secure it properly. If something happens to me, perhaps someday the right person will find it and understand what needs to be done. Oliver moved closer to his father as Michael continued reading. The government men came by again today. They are persistent, these people who want to classify my work to lock it away in some vault where it will benefit no one. They offer contracts and veiled threats in equal measure. I have told them nothing, but I know they will not give up easily. I am not a young man anymore, and I cannot run forever. The handwriting was that of someone educated and thoughtful, but there was an urgency in the later entries that suggested growing pressure. "Who do you think wrote this?" Oliver asked. Someone named Walter, Michael said, remembering what the county clerk had told him. "Walter Harrison. He used to live here." They spent the next hour exploring the cabin more thoroughly, Oliver's excitement growing with each discovery. In the back bedroom, they found built-in drawers that still contained a few items: old clothing, a pair of reading glasses, a small toolkit that looked well used but carefully maintained. The loft area proved to be a single room with slanted ceilings and windows on both ends. It would make a perfect bedroom for Oliver, with views of the forest canopy and enough space for a desk where he could draw and do homework. As the afternoon sun began to slant lower through the trees, they sat on the front porch steps, sharing a package of crackers Michael had brought from the car. The clearing around their cabin was larger than it had first appeared, with mature oak and maple trees providing a natural border. Through the trees, they could glimpse what might be a stream or a creek. "So what do you think, Oliver? Is this the kind of place you imagined when you were drawing those pictures?" Oliver leaned against his father's shoulder, a gesture of contentment that had become rare since Rebecca's death. "It's better, Dad. In my drawings, it was just me and you. But this place feels like it has stories, like it's been waiting for us." Michael looked at the weathered pages in his hands, thinking about the man who had written those journal entries, who had lived in this cabin and worked on something important enough that people had pursued him for it. Walter Harrison had been alone here at the end, but he'd left traces of his life, fragments of his story that somehow made the cabin feel less abandoned and more like a home waiting to be reclaimed. As they drove back toward town in the gathering dusk, Oliver was already making plans for the cleanup work they could start that weekend. They would need basic tools, cleaning supplies, and tarps to cover areas where the roof was compromised. The work would be hard, but they would do it together. For the first time since Rebecca died, Michael felt like they were moving towards something, instead of just trying to survive each day. The cabin was broken, but it was theirs to fix. The work ahead was daunting, but it was work with purpose. Work that would create something lasting for both of them. The weather journal pages lay on the dashboard between them. Walter Harrison's words, a reminder that their cabin held more than just shelter. It held secrets, stories, and perhaps the promise that even the most broken places could be transformed by the right hands and the right heart. Saturday morning arrived with the crisp promise of October, and Oliver was awake before dawn, his excitement about their first full day of work on the cabin making sleep impossible. Michael found him at the kitchen table eating cereal while sketching detailed plans for clearing vines and organizing tools. "I've figured out a system," Oliver announced as his father poured coffee. "We start with the front of the house so people can see we're making it nice, then work around to the sides and save the back for last, because nobody really sees that part anyway." Michael studied his son's drawing, impressed by the logical approach and attention to detail. "That's smart thinking, buddy. What about the inside?" "That's phase 2, Oliver said with the seriousness of a project manager. "First, we make the outside look good. Then we work on making the inside livable." They loaded the Honda with every tool Michael owned, a modest collection of wrenches, screwdrivers, a hammerwork gloves, and a small stepladder. From their meager savings, he'd managed to buy a set of hedge trimmers, a tarp, and basic cleaning supplies. It wasn't much for a complete cabin restoration, but it was enough to begin. The drive out to Pine Ridge Road felt different in daylight, the forest around them alive with fall colors and the sounds of birds and small animals going about their morning routines. When they reached their clearing, the cabin looked more hopeful in the golden morning light, as if it were ready to shed its shroud of neglect and return to life. Oliver attacked the vine removal with the enthusiasm of someone half his age, carefully untangling Virginia creeper. from around the front windows while Michael worked on the heavier growth covering the porch roof. The work was satisfying in a way that surprised them both. Each section of cleared wall revealed more of the cabin's original character, like uncovering a painting that had been hidden under layers of dust. "Dad, look at this," Oliver called from beside the front door. He had cleared enough vines to reveal a small wooden plaque mounted beside the entrance. The wood was weathered, but the carved letters were still readable. "Harrison, 1962. Walter built this place himself," Michael said, running his fingers over the carved letters. 25 years old when he started. As they worked, they began to understand more about the man who had lived here. The cabin had been constructed with unusual attention to detail. Joints fitted precisely, logs carefully selected, and matched windows positioned to capture maximum light while maintaining privacy. This wasn't a weekend retreat thrown together by amateurs. It was the careful work of someone who understood both craftsmanship and engineering. By noon, they had cleared the front wall, completely revealing windows that, while dirty and spiderwebbed, appeared to be intact and of surprisingly good quality. The afternoon was spent working on the interior, sweeping out years of leaves and debris, washing windows, and beginning to assess what needed repair versus what needed replacement. It was while cleaning the main room that Oliver made his next discovery. He had been working on the stone fireplace using a brush to clear away years of soot and debris when he noticed that one of the stones seemed different from the others. "This one's loose," he told his father, wiggling a stone about the size of a brick that sat at shoulder height on the left side of the fireplace. Michael examined the stone and found that it could be removed, entirely revealing a small cavity behind it. Inside the hollow space were more papers, not journal pages this time, but technical drawings rendered in precise detail, with notes in the same careful handwriting they'd found under the floorboards. The first drawing showed what appeared to be an electrical circuit, but unlike anything Michael had seen in his years working on car electrical systems. The design was complex, with components labeled in technical terminology that was beyond his understanding. At the bottom of the page in Walter's methodical script were the words, "Resonance Frequency Amplification System, Prototype 7. "What is it?" Dad Oliver asked, peering over his father's shoulder at the intricate drawings. "I'm not sure. Some kind of electrical invention." Your friend Walter was apparently quite the engineer. The second drawing was even more complex, showing what looked like a three-dimensional structure with precise measurements in multiple cross-sections. This diagram was labeled Harmonic Energy Converter, Final Design Specifications. As Michael studied the drawings, his mechanical mind began to recognize certain principles despite the advanced nature of the designs. These weren't random inventions or amateur experiments. They represented sophisticated engineering with practical applications that he could only begin to guess at. "There's more," Oliver said, reaching deeper into the cavity. He pulled out a small metal object wrapped in oiled cloth, a component that matched one of the elements shown in the circuit diagram. The piece was beautifully machined with tolerances that spoke of professional precision and expensive equipment. He wasn't just designing these things, Michael said quietly. He was building them. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the cabin with new eyes, looking for other hidden compartments or storage areas. In the back bedroom, Oliver discovered that one of the built-in drawers had a false bottom, beneath which lay more circuit diagrams and what appeared to be a parts inventory list written in Walter's careful hand. The list was extensive and technical. Copper wire gauge 12, AWG 500 feet. Ceramic capacitors, 0.1 UF 24 units. Precision resistors, 1% tolerance. Various values. Ferrite core transformers. Custom wound. Someone had invested serious money and time in acquiring specialized components. As evening approached and they prepared to head back to town, both father and son felt the weight of mystery settling around their new home. The cabin wasn't just an abandoned building. It was the workshop and laboratory of someone who had been working on inventions advanced enough to attract government attention. During the drive home, Oliver was uncharacteristically quiet, processing the implications of what they discovered. "Dad," he finally said as they reached the paved road, "do you think Mr. Walter is still alive somewhere?" Michael considered the question carefully. The journal entries suggested that Walter had been under pressure from government agents in 1987, nearly 40 years ago. The man would be quite elderly now, assuming he had survived whatever situation had forced him to abandon his home. "I don't know, buddy. The journal entries were from a long time ago, but I think maybe he left all those papers and drawings for someone like us to find. Someone like us, people who would appreciate the cabin, who would take care of it, and maybe understand that his work was important. As they pulled into the parking lot of their apartment complex, Oliver turned to look back in the direction they'd come from, toward the woods, where their cabin waited in the darkness. I think he picked us, Dad. I think somehow he knew we would be the ones to find his stuff and take care of his house. Michael looked at his son's serious expression and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October evening air, because as impossible as it seemed, he was beginning to think Oliver might be right. Their third weekend at the cabin began with Oliver making the most significant discovery yet. While Michael worked on replacing damaged roof shingles, his son had volunteered to clean out the crawl space beneath the main floor, a task that had seemed simple enough until Oliver's excited shout brought his father scrambling down from the roof. "Dad, you have to see this. There's a whole box of stuff down here." Michael crawled into the cramped space beneath the cabin, his flashlight beam joining Oliver's, to illuminate a metal strongbox that had been wedged between the floor joists in the far corner. The box was about the size of a small suitcase made of heavy steel, with a combination lock that looked both sturdy and old. Getting the box out required removing a section of lattice skirting from the outside of the cabin. But once they had it in the daylight, both father and son stared at it with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The metal was slightly corroded but intact, and whatever was inside had been protected from moisture and time. "Should we try to open it?" Oliver asked. Michael examined the combination lock. 3 wheels number 0 through 9 on each. That meant 1,000 possible combinations, assuming they had to try them all. But something told him that Walter Harrison wouldn't have chosen a random number. "Let's think about this logically," he said. "If you were hiding something important, what numbers would you use for the combination?" Oliver studied the box thoughtfully. Maybe his birthday, or the year he built the cabin. They tried 1962, the year carved on the plaque by the front door. Nothing. They tried various combinations of numbers they'd seen in the journal entries. Still nothing. It was Oliver who suggested they look more carefully at the technical drawings they had already found. In the corner of the first circuit diagram, almost too small to notice, were the numbers 743 written in pencil. The lock opened with 3 satisfying clicks. Inside the box, wrapped in waterproof plastic, were treasures that made their previous discoveries seem like previews of a much larger story. The first item was a hand-drawn map of their property, but far more detailed than anything the county had provided. This map showed not just the boundaries of their 2 acres, but topographical features, underground water sources, and several locations marked with cryptic symbols. Beneath the map were more technical drawings, but these were different from what they'd found before. These diagrams showed complete systems rather than individual components, with notations that suggested working prototypes had been built and tested. Most intriguing of all was a vintage compass, not the plastic kind used for camping, but a precision instrument made of brass and steel with a weighted needle that moved smoothly and accurately despite its apparent age. The compass was engraved with the initials WH and a date, 1965. "This is beautiful," Oliver said, turning the compass in his hands and watching the needle adjust to magnetic north. "It's like something from a pirate movie." Michael was studying the map, comparing the symbols marked on it to their actual surroundings. One symbol located about 50 yards behind the cabin, near what the map indicated was a natural spring, caught his attention. It looked like a combination of geometric shapes that didn't match any standard surveying notation he'd ever seen. "What do you think these marks mean?" he asked, showing Oliver the various symbols scattered across the map. Oliver examined the markings with the intense concentration he usually reserved for his artwork. "They look like a treasure map, like someone buried things in different places around our property." The more Michael studied the map, the more he had to agree with his son's assessment. The symbols weren't random. They appeared to be deliberately placed to mark specific locations, and several of them had numbers beside them that might indicate some kind of sequence or priority. Armed with the compass and map, they spent the afternoon exploring areas of their property they hadn't yet investigated. The land was more varied than they'd realized, with rolling hills, a year-round creek, and several natural clearings that would be perfect for gardens or workshop space. The symbol marked closest to the cabin led them to what appeared to be a natural spring feeding into their creek. The water ran clear and cold, forming a small pool before continuing downstream. But it was what they found near the spring that made them both stop and stare. Partially hidden by ferns and fallen logs was a concrete structure about the size of a large grave marker, but clearly man-made and purposeful. The concrete was weathered but intact, and set into its top surface was a metal plate with another symbol etched into it, the same symbol that appeared on their map. "It's like a marker," Oliver said, kneeling beside the concrete structure. "Like Walter left signs for people to follow." Michael examined the metal plate more closely and discovered that it wasn't just decorative. It could be rotated like a dial. When he turned it clockwise, it clicked into different positions. Each click aligning the etched symbol with one of several small notches cut it into the concrete around its edge. "Dad, look at this," Oliver called from a few feet away. He had been exploring around the spring and found another metal object, partially buried in the soft earth near the water's edge. A small cylindrical device about the size of a flashlight made of the same kind of precision machine metal they'd found in the fireplace. The cylinder was heavier than it looked, with one end that could be unscrewed to reveal complex internal components. Unlike the simple elegance of the compass, this device looked unmistakably modern, even futuristic, despite being buried for who knew how many years. "What do you think it does?" Oliver asked. Michael turned the device in his hands, noting the quality of the machining and the unusual design of the internal components. Whatever it was, it represented significant engineering expertise and expensive materials. "I think," he said slowly, "we're beginning to understand that your friend Walter wasn't just an inventor. He was an inventor who built things that worked." As afternoon shifted toward evening, they marked the location of the spring and the concrete structure on their own copy of Walter's map, starting what Oliver insisted on calling their treasure inventory. The original map showed at least 6 other symbols scattered around their property, each potentially marking another cache or clue left by their mysterious predecessor. Walking back toward the cabin, through the lengthening shadows, both father and son were quiet, processing the implications of what they'd found. The metal cylinder weighed heavy in Michael's pocket, a reminder that their simple renovation project was evolving into something much more complex and potentially significant. "Dad," Oliver said as they approached their cabin, "do you think we should tell anyone about this stuff?" It was a question Michael had been asking himself all afternoon. The journal entries suggested that Walter had been hiding from people who wanted to control his work. If those same people or their successors were still around, revealing Walter's secrets might bring unwanted attention to their quiet property and their simple dream of building a home together. "I think," Michael said carefully, "that for now, this should be our secret. Walter trusted someone to find his work and take care of it. Maybe that someone is us." Oliver nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of the responsibility they'd inherited along with their property. As they prepared to head back to town, Michael took one last look at their cabin, now partially cleared of vines, and looking more like a home with each weekend's work. But it was also becoming something else, a repository of secrets, a testament to one man's lifetime of innovation, and perhaps the key to understanding something far more valuable than either of them had imagined when they'd made that desperate bid at the county auction. The compass in Oliver's pocket pointed steadily north, but Michael had the feeling their true direction was still being determined by forces they didn't yet understand. As they continued to explore their property over the next few weekends, each discovery added new dimensions to the puzzle of Walter Harrison and his work. Following the symbols on the map led them to a series of hidden caches, each containing components, technical journals, or small devices that seemed to be parts of a larger system. One location, marked by a different symbol than the others, led them to a small clearing where they found an unusual rock formation. What initially appeared to be natural stones arranged in a rough circle turned out to be carefully placed markers. At the center of the circle, embedded in the ground and nearly invisible beneath a layer of fallen leaves, was a flat metal plate engraved with intricate geometric patterns. When Michael brushed away the debris, he found that the plate was actually a cover for a small underground chamber, constructed of concrete and lined with what looked like copper mesh. Inside, protected from the elements, was a waterproof container holding more technical documents, these far more detailed than what they'd found before. Walter had created a network of hiding places throughout the property, each containing pieces of his research too important to leave in the cabin, but too valuable to destroy. The methodical way he had concealed his work spoke of someone who understood that knowledge once lost might never be recovered. The technical materials gradually revealed a coherent picture of what Walter had been working on: a revolutionary approach to energy generation that harnessed principles of quantum resonance and field theory in ways that went beyond conventional science. The design showed systems that could extract energy from what most physicists would consider empty space, using carefully calibrated resonant circuits to amplify tiny fluctuations into usable power. Michael's background as a mechanic gave him enough technical foundation to recognize the potential implications, even if the theoretical physics was beyond his understanding. If Walter's designs worked as described, they represented an approach to energy production that would make fossil fuels and even conventional renewable energy obsolete. No wonder the government men had been so persistent, he thought, as he examined a particularly detailed schematic. This wasn't just another invention. This was something that could change civilization's relationship with energy, something that powerful interests might want to control or suppress. As they worked on restoring the cabin, making it weather-tight before winter set in, Michael found himself increasingly drawn to Walter's technical materials. In the evenings after Oliver was asleep, he would spread the diagrams across their kitchen table, trying to understand the principles and connections between the various systems. One night, as he was comparing two different design iterations, he noticed something that made his breath catch. The later designs weren't just refinements of the earlier concepts. They represented fundamental breakthroughs that simplified the entire approach. Walter hadn't just been tinkering with his invention. He'd been making it more elegant, more efficient, and most significantly easier to reproduce with common materials. The latest designs, dated just weeks before the final journal entry, showed systems that could be constructed without exotic components or precision manufacturing. It was as if Walter had been deliberately redesigning his technology to be built by someone with limited resources and basic technical skills, someone exactly like Michael. The realization hit him with the force of certainty. Walter Harrison hadn't just hidden his work. He'd prepared it to be found and used by whoever came after him. The question was no longer whether they should tell anyone about their discoveries, but whether they were ready for the responsibility of bringing Walter's vision to reality. When Oliver found a hidden panel in the loft that contained a complete set of construction plans for a working prototype, Michael knew they had crossed a threshold. These weren't just interesting historical artifacts. They were blueprints for something that could change the world. Blueprints that Walter had entrusted to whoever would find them. That night, as they drove back to their apartment, the weight of that trust settled over Michael like a physical presence. He looked at Oliver, who was studying the compass Walter had left, turning it over in his hands with careful reverence. "We need to understand what we've found before we decide what to do with it," Michael said. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about Walter's life's work." Oliver nodded, his eyes serious beyond his 9 years. "I think he was trying to help people, Dad. I think he wanted to make things better, but someone tried to stop him. I think you're right, buddy, and now we have to figure out if we can do what he couldn't." The silence that followed was filled with the unspoken understanding that their lives had changed in ways neither of them could fully comprehend. The cabin they'd bought for a hunt was more than a home. It was a legacy, a responsibility, and perhaps a mission that would define their future together. As they approached town, the lights of their apartment complex visible in the distance, Michael made a decision that would set their course for the months ahead. They would continue to restore the cabin, but they would also begin to study Walter's designs in earnest, to understand not just what he had built, but why it mattered enough for him to hide it from those who pursued him. The broken place they had purchased out of desperation had turned out to hold treasures beyond imagination. But the greatest treasure might be the purpose it was giving to their lives, a chance to continue something important, something that mattered not just to them but potentially to many others. In Oliver's careful hands, the compass needle swung steadily north, but their journey was just beginning. Winter was approaching fast, bringing with it a sense of urgency as Michael and Oliver worked to make the cabin habitable before the first snow. Every weekend they drove out to Pine Ridge Road, gradually transforming the abandoned structure into something that could shelter them from the coming cold. The roof had been patched with salvaged shingles, broken windows replaced with secondhand panes, and the sagging porch reinforced with pressure-treated lumber Michael had found at a construction site dumpster. The discoveries they'd made, Walter's journals, the technical drawings, the hidden caches, had become an organizing principle for their lives, giving shape and purpose to what had begun as mere survival. Each evening after returning from the cabin, they would spread their findings across the apartment's kitchen table, trying to piece together the puzzle of Walter Harrison's work. Oliver had created a detailed inventory of everything they'd found, categorizing items by location and apparent function. His artistic skills proved unexpectedly valuable as he sketched components and systems with remarkable accuracy, capturing details that photographs might have missed. Michael, meanwhile, had begun studying basic electrical engineering through library books and free online courses, determined to understand the principles behind Walter's designs. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, a rare day off from the garage, Michael decided to take Oliver to the cabin for some additional work before the holiday weekend. Snow was forecast for the following week, and he wanted to ensure the wood stove was properly installed and safe to operate. As they drove through the forest, barren trees reaching toward a pewter sky, both felt the peculiar combination of excitement and responsibility that had become their shared emotional state. The cabin looked different now, partially restored with cleared surroundings and a woodpile stacked neatly against the side wall. It was becoming theirs in a way that transcended legal ownership, shaped by their labor and vision. Yet Walter's presence remained an invisible third occupant whose legacy guided their every decision. While Michael worked on the wood stove, Oliver volunteered to examine the shed behind the cabin, a structure they'd mostly ignored during previous visits. The small outbuilding, roughly 12 feet square, had seemed unremarkable, just a typical storage space for tools and equipment. But as Oliver circled it, measuring tape in hand, a puzzled expression crossed his face. "Dad, something's weird about this shed. When I measure outside, it's 12 feet on each side. But when I measure inside, it's more like 18 feet deep." Michael wiped soot from his hands and joined his son, confirming the discrepancy with his own measurements. The interior dimensions simply didn't match the exterior footprint, a physical impossibility unless something was deliberately hidden. After a systematic examination of the interior walls, Michael noticed subtle differences in the wood grain of the back wall panels. Pressing against various sections, he felt a slight give in one particular area. Applying firm, steady pressure, he was rewarded with a mechanical click as a hidden mechanism released. A section of wall approximately 4 feet wide swung inward on concealed hinges, revealing darkness beyond. The breath caught in Michael's throat as he shined his flashlight through the opening, illuminating a passageway that led into what appeared to be a much larger space carved into the hillside behind the shed. Oliver gripped his father's arm, eyes wide with wonder. Dr. Harrison built a secret laboratory. Stepping through the doorway felt like crossing a threshold between worlds. Motion sensors detected their presence, activating an electrical system that gradually illuminated the hidden space. Soft ambient lighting revealed a laboratory that extended at least 30 feet into the hillside, professionally constructed with reinforced concrete walls, proper ventilation, and what appeared to be independent power systems. The laboratory was meticulously organized with workbenches along both walls, equipped with precision tools and measuring instruments that looked both vintage and sophisticated. Glass-fronted cabinets contained electronic components, chemical supplies, and reference materials carefully labeled and categorized. But it was the device at the center of the room that commanded attention, a circular platform approximately 6 feet in diameter, surrounded by concentric rings of metal components connected to a complex control panel. Oliver moved slowly through the space, touching nothing but absorbing everything, with the heightened awareness of someone witnessing history. It's like something from a science fiction movie, but it's real. Michael examined the main workbench, where several technical manuals were arranged in sequence, each bearing Walter's distinctive handwriting. The cover of the first volume bore a title that made his hands tremble slightly as he read it aloud: "Practical Energy Generation Through Harmonic Resonance, a Complete System for Unlimited Clean Power." The second manual was equally provocative: Gravitational Field Manipulation, Theoretical Principles, and Practical Applications. These weren't speculative texts or theoretical proposals. They were detailed construction and operation manuals for working technology, complete with testing protocols, performance specifications, and safety guidelines. Various devices in different stages of assembly occupied the workbenches, from small handheld units to larger systems connected to monitoring equipment. Unlike the rough prototypes they'd found in the hidden caches, these appeared to be refined production-ready versions, the culmination of decades of development and testing. As Michael examined one of the smaller devices, a unit about the size of a toaster that hummed with barely perceptible vibration, he noticed something that didn't align with the abandoned state of the cabin. There was no dust on the workbenches. The tools showed signs of recent use, and when he touched the small device, it was warm. Looking more carefully around the laboratory, he spotted other anomalies: a coffee mug with residue that hadn't had time to dry completely, a notebook open to a page with fresh ink, a chair positioned as if someone had recently risen from it. The conclusion was inescapable but seemingly impossible. Someone had been working in this laboratory very recently. Moving deeper into the space, they discovered a narrow corridor leading to additional rooms. The first was a small but efficient living area with a bed, kitchenette, and bathroom facilities, essentially a studio apartment built into the hillside. The second room was a study lined with bookshelves containing technical references, scientific journals, and handwritten research notes spanning decades. On the desk in this study lay the most shocking evidence, yet newspapers dated just weeks earlier, scientific journals from the current month, and a laptop computer in sleep mode. Beside these sat a leather-bound journal open to a page dated just 2 weeks before Michael had purchased the property at auction. "The new owner will arrive soon. I have watched and waited, and I believe I have chosen correctly. The father is honest and capable. The son is bright and curious. They will understand what needs to be done." Michael stared at the words, their implication washing over him like ice water. Walter Harrison wasn't just alive, he had orchestrated their acquisition of the property. The auction, the absurdly low price, the abandoned cabin, all of it had been arranged to bring Michael and Oliver here to this moment of discovery. Oliver touched the journal with reverent fingers, tracing the words as if to confirm their reality. "He knew we were coming. He picked us." Michael nodded slowly, pieces falling into place with unsettling clarity. The convenient timing of the auction notice, the house flipper who had so easily abandoned his bid, even the county clerk's unusual helpfulness all suggested careful planning and possible manipulation. Walter Harrison had been evaluating them, testing their character and capabilities through a series of orchestrated discoveries. But why? What could a brilliant scientist possibly want with a struggling mechanic and his 9-year-old son? As the full implications settled over them, a mixture of emotions washed through Michael. Confusion, wonder, and a touch of anger at being manipulated, however benevolently. But more than anything, he felt a growing sense of purpose. Walter had chosen them for a reason, seeing something in them that aligned with his own vision. They spent hours exploring the laboratory, cataloging equipment, and studying the manuals. The technology was revolutionary by any standard systems that could generate clean, limitless energy using principles that mainstream science had barely begun to explore. If Walter's designs worked as documented, they represented solutions to problems that the world's brightest minds and richest corporations were still struggling to solve. As darkness fell outside, they reluctantly prepared to leave, locking the hidden door behind them. The drive back to town passed in contemplative silence, both father and son processing the magnitude of what they'd discovered. The broken-down cabin they'd purchased for $100 now seemed like the visible tip of a much larger and more significant structure, one whose full dimensions they were only beginning to comprehend. Arriving at their apartment building, they found an envelope taped to their door. No postmark, no return address, just their names written in now familiar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper containing an invitation that would force them to confront the full reality of what they'd inherited. "Dear Michael and Oliver, I know you have discovered the laboratory and understand the significance of what has been placed in your care. I've watched you work on the cabin with patience and dedication, and I have seen how you protect each discovery while seeking to understand its purpose. You have proven yourselves to be exactly the kind of people I hoped would find this place. The time has come for us to meet properly. Tomorrow evening at sunset, please come to the clearing by the natural spring where you found the first marker. I will be waiting there with explanations, legal documentation, and most importantly, the final piece of information you need to make an informed decision about whether you wish to accept the responsibility I am offering. What I have built represents 30 years of my life's work. The devices you have seen are functional and tested. They produce clean energy using principles that conventional science is only beginning to understand. In the right hands, this technology could provide abundant power for communities around the world. In the wrong hands, it could be weaponized or suppressed by interests that profit from scarcity. I am 78 years old now, and I cannot continue to guard this work alone. I need successors who understand both its potential and its dangers. Based on what I have observed, I believe you may be those people. If you choose not to accept this responsibility, I will understand completely, and arrangements have been made to ensure the technology remains safely hidden. But if you are willing to learn and to help me share this knowledge with the world in a responsible way, then tomorrow we begin a partnership that will change both your lives and potentially the lives of millions of others. Until tomorrow, Walter Harrison. Michael read the letter twice, then handed it to Oliver, whose eyes widened as he absorbed its contents. He's really alive, and he wants to meet us that night. Michael lay awake on their second-hand sofa, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the choice they were facing. A month ago, his biggest concern had been making rent and keeping their car running. Now he was being asked to become the guardian of technology that could revolutionize energy, production, and change the balance of global power. The practical challenges alone seemed overwhelming. How does someone protect and responsibly develop technology worth millions of dollars while living paycheck to paycheck? How do you ensure that revolutionary inventions reach people who need them rather than being acquired by corporations that might suppress them? How do you distinguish between legitimate researchers and government agents who might want to classify the work? But beneath his anxiety lay a growing sense of purpose that he hadn't felt since Rebecca's death. The restoration work on the cabin had given him and Oliver a shared project, but this was something far more significant, the opportunity to be part of something that could help people, that could leave the world better than they'd found it. The next day passed with unusual slowness. Michael found it difficult to concentrate on his work at the auto shop, his mind constantly returning to the meeting that awaited them that evening. Oliver was equally distracted at school, his teacher noting later that he'd spent most of the day staring out the window and sketching what looked like technical diagrams in his notebook margins. They arrived at the cabin an hour before sunset, both nervous about the encounter ahead. The clearing by the spring looked exactly as it had during their previous visits, but the knowledge that Walter Harrison was somewhere nearby, waiting to reveal himself after decades of hiding, charged the familiar setting with new significance. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, a figure emerged from the trees on the far side of the clearing. Walter Harrison looked exactly as Michael had imagined him, tall and lean, with silver hair and intelligent eyes, moving with the careful precision of someone accustomed to working with delicate equipment. He wore practical clothes suitable for outdoor work, and his handshake when he approached them was firm and warm. Michael Oliver, thank you for coming. I apologize for the secrecy, but I needed to be certain you were the right people before revealing myself. Oliver, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the walk to the spring, found his voice first. Did you really build all those machines by yourself? Walter smiled, the expression transforming his serious features into something grandfatherly and approachable. I did indeed, Oliver, and if you're willing to learn, I'd like to teach you how they work and why they matter. For the next 2 hours, as daylight faded into twilight, Walter shared the story of his life's work. He'd begun his career in military research, developing communications and radar technology during and after World War II. But his interests had gradually shifted toward understanding energy itself, how it moved, how it could be harnessed, and how conventional approaches to power generation were limited by incomplete understanding of fundamental physics. The devices in my laboratory work on principles that most scientists would say are impossible, Walter explained. They extract energy from what appears to be empty space using resonance effects that amplify small inputs into large outputs. The mathematics are complex, but the basic concept is simple. There is energy everywhere around us, and we can learn to tap into it without burning fuel or producing waste. He showed them operational models of his smallest devices, units about the size of a car battery, that could power a house indefinitely without any external fuel source. The implications were staggering. Communities could become energy independent. Developing nations could have abundant power without expensive infrastructure. And the environmental problems caused by fossil fuel consumption could be addressed at their source. Why haven't you shared this with the world already? Michael's question emerged from a place of genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. Walter's expression grew serious. Because the world isn't ready for free energy, at least not in the way most people understand readiness. The economic disruption would be enormous. Entire industries would become obsolete overnight, and the military applications. He paused, considering his words carefully. Let's just say that technology this powerful requires very careful handling. As full darkness settled around them, Walter outlined his proposal. He would teach them everything he knew, transfer complete legal ownership of his work to them, and help them establish a foundation dedicated to responsible development and distribution of the technology. But they would need to understand that accepting this legacy meant accepting risks that went far beyond normal business ventures. There will be people who want to acquire this technology for purposes you wouldn't approve of, Walter warned. There will be others who want to suppress it to protect their own interests. You would need to be very careful about who you trust and how quickly you move to make this knowledge public. The final piece of Walter's proposal was both the most generous and the most daunting. He had spent decades not just developing the technology, but accumulating the resources needed to bring it to market responsibly. Through careful investment of his patents and consulting income, he had built a fund worth over $5 million specifically designated for technology development and distribution. The money is yours if you accept the responsibility that comes with it, Walter said. But understand that this is not wealth in the conventional sense. Every dollar is designated for the work for making this technology available to communities that need it most. As they walked back toward the cabin through the darkness, all three were quiet, processing the magnitude of what had been offered and what would be required in return. For Michael and Oliver, the decision would transform their lives completely. For Walter, it represented the culmination of 30 years of patient preparation for this moment. Standing on the porch of the cabin, looking up at stars that seemed brighter and more numerous than usual, Oliver broke the silence with the directness that had characterized all his important questions. Mr. Walter, if we say yes, does that mean we can help make sure everyone has enough electricity and heat and things like that? Walter nodded. That's exactly what it means, Oliver. We would be working to make energy abundant and clean for everyone who needs it. Oliver looked at his father, his expression serious but determined. Then I think we should say yes, Dad. I think this is what we're supposed to do. Michael looked at his son, then at Walter, then back at the cabin that had started as their desperate attempt at home ownership and had become the center of something far more significant than he'd ever imagined possible. The choice would change everything about their lives, but it would also give them the opportunity to be part of something that could change everything about the world. Yes, he said quietly, we accept. The night after their meeting with Walter, neither Michael nor Oliver slept well, their minds racing with the implications of their decision. The prospect of partnering with a brilliant scientist to develop revolutionary technology was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. By morning, Michael had compiled a list of practical questions that needed answers before they could move forward, and questions about timing, legal protections, security measures, and how they would balance this new responsibility with their existing obligations. Walter, however, had anticipated most of these concerns. When they arrived at the cabin the following Saturday, they found him in the laboratory surrounded by legal documents, financial records, and detailed plans for what he called the transition phase. His preparation was comprehensive, reflecting decades of careful planning for this exact moment. For the next month, they established a routine. Weekdays were spent maintaining their normal lives. Michael at the garage, Oliver at school, while weekends and evenings were dedicated to learning from Walter. The education was intense and multifaceted, covering not just the technical aspects of the technology, but its historical context, theoretical foundations, and potential applications. Oliver proved to be an exceptionally quick study, grasping complex principles with an intuitive understanding that sometimes surprised even Walter. The boy's artistic abilities translated seamlessly into technical drafting skills, allowing him to visualize and refine designs in ways that neither Michael nor Walter had considered. Michael's contribution was equally valuable but different in nature. His years as a mechanic had given him a practical understanding of how things work in the real world, knowledge of materials, fabrication techniques, and the inevitable gap between theoretical design and functional implementation. Where Walter was brilliant at conceptualizing breakthrough technologies, Michael excelled at making them robust, reliable, and reproducible. Together, the three formed a complementary team, each bringing distinct strengths to their shared mission. But as December progressed and their work gathered momentum, external threats began to materialize. The first warning came in the form of an unexpected visit to Carson's auto repair. Michael was halfway through replacing a transmission when Tom Carson called him into the office where two men in dark suits waited. The older man, gray-haired with a diplomat's smooth manner, introduced himself as Richard Keller from the Department of Energy's Advanced Research Division. His younger colleague, sharp-featured and military in bearing, was identified only as Mr. Stevens. Mr. Bennett, Keller began, "We understand you recently purchased property on Pine Ridge Road, a cabin previously owned by Dr. Walter Harrison." Michael's face remained neutral despite the sudden acceleration of his pulse. "That's right. Tax auction last month. Place was abandoned for years according to the county records." Keller smiled thinly. "We have reason to believe that Dr. Harrison may have left certain materials at that property, research documents, and possibly prototype devices that technically remain government property under classification rules from the 1980s. The younger man, Stevens, leaned forward slightly. "We'd like to arrange a visit to the property to recover these materials. The government is prepared to compensate you generously, say 20 times what you paid at auction." Michael wiped his hands slowly on a shop rag, buying time to compose his thoughts. "The cabin's pretty much a wreck. I've been fixing it up on weekends, but there's not much there besides old furniture and a lot of water damage. I haven't found any research materials." Keller's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Nevertheless, we'd like to inspect the property, Dr. Tim. Harrison was working on sensitive technology with potential national security implications. It's important that we recover any materials he may have left behind." "I'll need to think about it," Michael replied. "The place belongs to my son as much as me. It's our home now." The conversation ended with an exchange of contact information and Keller's assurance that they would be in touch soon. As they left, Michael noticed Stevens taking a photo of his Honda in the parking lot, documenting the license plate. That evening, after retrieving Oliver from a friend's house, Michael drove directly to the cabin by an indirect route, checking frequently for signs of surveillance. Walter was waiting in the laboratory, having been alerted by security systems he'd installed throughout the property. His reaction to news of the visit was grim but unsurprised. "They've been monitoring the property intermittently for decades," Walter explained. "The auction must have triggered renewed interest. Now that they know someone has purchased it, they'll be watching more closely." The implications were clear. Their window of opportunity was narrowing. If government agents became convinced that Walter's technology was still at the cabin, or worse, that Walter himself was alive and continuing his work, they would move quickly to secure the property and classify all materials under national security provisions. That night, as they huddled in the laboratory discussing contingency plans, Walter's security system detected movement at the property boundary. Surveillance cameras showed two figures in dark clothing moving methodically through the woods, carrying what appeared to be scanning equipment. They were methodically sweeping the area, following a grid pattern that would eventually lead them to the cabin. Walter led them to a monitoring station where multiple screens displayed camera feeds from throughout the property. "These aren't just government agents," he said quietly. "The equipment they're carrying is too sophisticated for a routine inspection. Someone has authorized an advanced technical survey." The tension in the laboratory was palpable as they watched the intruders work their way closer to the cabin. Walter's expression grew increasingly concerned as one of the men consulted a device that emitted a soft blue glow, adjusting his course in response to its readings. "They're using quantum field detection equipment," Walter said, his voice tight. "It can sense energy patterns from my devices even when powered down. We need to leave now." Moving quickly but methodically, Walter activated a series of protocols on the laboratory's main computer. Lights dimmed momentarily as systems went into secure mode, data transfers initiated, and certain devices began powering down in controlled sequences. From a hidden safe beneath the main workbench, Walter retrieved a USB drive encased in titanium and handed it to Michael. "This contains everything: complete technical specifications, manufacturing processes, test results, and documentation of previous government interference. It's encrypted, but the password is Oliver's birthday. There's also evidence of who has been trying to suppress this technology and why." Walter led them to a concealed exit at the rear of the laboratory, a narrow tunnel that extended 300 yards through the hillside, eventually emerging in a dense stand of pines well away from the cabin. Before they entered the passage, he gave Michael a business card with an address in the state capital. "Go to this address tomorrow at noon. Ask for Margaret Chen. She's my attorney and has been preparing for this day for 15 years. She'll help you with the next steps." "But what about you?" Oliver's question cut through the tension, reminding them all that more than technology was at stake. Walter smiled reassuringly. I've evaded these people for 40 years, Oliver. I know how to disappear when necessary. We'll meet again when it's safe. As Michael and Oliver prepared to enter the tunnel, Walter placed a hand on each of their shoulders. Remember why we're doing this. Energy scarcity creates dependency and inequality. Abundant clean energy means freedom and possibility for millions of people. That's worth protecting, even at great personal cost. The tunnel was narrow but well constructed, with emergency lighting that activated as they progressed. Behind them, they heard Walter sealing the entrance, implementing security measures designed to protect his life's work from those who would control or suppress it. Emerging from the tunnel into the cold December night, they made their way carefully through the forest to where Michael had parked the Honda on a service road half a mile from the cabin. As they drove away, lights became visible through the trees, flashlights converging on the cabin from multiple directions. The drive back to town was tense, both of them watching for signs of pursuit while processing the dramatic escalation of events. The USB drive felt impossibly heavy in Michael's pocket, its contents representing both tremendous opportunity and serious danger. We can't go back to the apartment, Michael realized. If those men found me at work, they probably know where we live too. They spent the night in a small motel on the outskirts of town, paying cash and using a false name. Neither slept much, their minds racing with questions about Walter's safety and their own next steps. By morning, it was clear that they needed to follow Walter's instructions and meet with his attorney. Whatever legal and financial arrangements he had prepared would be essential for protecting both the technology and themselves. The state capitol was a 3-hour drive, which they made in tense silence, both watching for signs of surveillance. The address Walter had provided led them to a prestigious office building in the financial district, where Margaret Chan occupied a corner suite on the 15th floor. The attorney was a striking woman in her 50s with an air of composed efficiency that seemed perfectly suited to her elegant office. She showed no surprise at their arrival, suggesting that Walter had already contacted her about the previous night's events. Dr. Harrison has been my client for 15 years, she explained, guiding them to a conference room where folders of documents awaited. During that time, we've been systematically preparing for the scenario that appears to be unfolding now. The table was covered with legal papers, financial records, and technical documents, the administrative infrastructure of Walter's vision. Margaret moved through the materials with practiced precision, explaining each component of the plan Walter had developed. First, there are the patents, she began. Dr. Harrison has been filing strategic patents since the 1960s, not for his core technology, which would have attracted too much attention, but for peripheral components and applications that establish legal precedent without revealing the fundamental breakthroughs. She showed them a portfolio of intellectual property that covered dozens of innovations, each carefully structured to protect aspects of Walter's technology without exposing its revolutionary core. The patents alone represented millions of dollars in potential licensing revenue, but more importantly, they provided legal protection against corporate appropriation. Next, there's the foundation structure, Margaret continued. Dr. Harrison has established a nonprofit entity dedicated to developing and distributing clean energy technology to underserved communities. The foundation is fully funded and legally structured to resist takeover attempts by both governmental and corporate interests. The financial component was equally impressive. Through decades of careful investment, Walter had accumulated resources specifically designated for advancing his technology. The fund wasn't just money, it was freedom from the constraints that typically force innovators to compromise their vision or sell to the highest bidder. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, there's the distribution and protection strategy, Margaret explained. Dr. Harrison has created a network of supporters, scientists, engineers, community leaders, and environmental advocates who are prepared to help implement the technology responsibly. They don't know all the details yet, but they're positioned to move quickly when the time comes. As Michael and Oliver absorbed the scope of Walter's preparations, a new understanding dawned. This wasn't just about technology or even energy independence. It was about fundamentally changing humanity's relationship with energy, transitioning from a paradigm of scarcity and control to one of abundance and access. By the time Margaret finished her presentation, the magnitude of what they'd agreed to had become clear. They weren't just accepting responsibility for a collection of devices or even a revolutionary energy system. They were becoming stewards of a different possible future, one where energy wasn't a commodity controlled by powerful interests, but a fundamental right available to all. The immediate practical challenges were daunting. They would need to relocate at least temporarily, while legal mechanisms were activated to protect their rights to the cabin and its contents. They would need to learn quickly, not just about the technology itself, but about patent law, nonprofit management, and security protocols. And they would need to determine who they could trust in a landscape where billions of dollars and significant power structures were potentially threatened by what they controlled. As they prepared to leave Margaret's office with copies of key documents and temporary access to Foundation resources, her phone rang. The brief conversation that followed changed everything. Walter has been taken into custody, she informed them, her professional composure momentarily broken by genuine concern. Government agents intercepted him trying to leave the area. They're holding him at a federal facility under national security provisions. The news hit Michael and Oliver like a physical blow. Despite his reassurances, Walter had been captured, the outcome he had evaded for decades finally catching up with him, just as he was preparing to pass his legacy to new guardians. This triggers our contingency protocols. Margaret continued, recovering her focus. Within 24 hours, if Walter doesn't check in with certain secure systems, information about his technology and the attempts to suppress it will be automatically released to journalists, scientists, and public interest organizations worldwide. It's his insurance policy, and now yours. As they left the building, the weight of responsibility settled over them with new intensity. Walter Harrison was no longer a mysterious benefactor or even a mentor. He was a prisoner held by powerful interests who wanted to control or suppress his life's work. And Michael and Oliver Bennett, who a month ago had been struggling just to make rent, were now the only people who could ensure that his vision survived. As they left the prestigious downtown office building, Michael and Oliver stepped into a world fundamentally altered by the past hour's revelations. Margaret Chen's words hung in the air between them. Walter Harrison, their mysterious benefactor and mentor, was now in government custody. The responsibility for his life's work, revolutionary technology that could transform humanity's relationship with energy, now rested squarely on their shoulders. The titanium USB drive in Michael's pocket felt impossibly heavy, its contents representing both tremendous opportunity and serious danger. For a mechanic who'd been counting pennies just weeks earlier, the weight of this new reality was almost crushing. Yet as he looked at Oliver's determined face, Michael found unexpected strength. His son's resilience in the face of loss had already taught him that survival sometimes required embracing impossible challenges. "We need somewhere safe to stay tonight," Michael said as they reached the Honda. "We can't go back to the apartment until we figure out our next steps." Their immediate future materialized in the form of a modest extended-stay hotel on the outskirts of the capital, paid for with Foundation funds Margaret had authorized. The anonymous room became their temporary command center as they began to process the extraordinary transition plan Walter had prepared. The USB drive contained far more than technical specifications. It held a comprehensive blueprint for continuing Walter's mission in his absence: contingency protocols, contact information for trusted allies, educational resources, and most importantly, a personal message recorded just weeks earlier. Walter's face appeared on the laptop screen, his expression serious but calm. "Michael Oliver, if you're watching this, I've been detained. This was always a possibility I had to prepare for. What matters now isn't my freedom, but ensuring the technology reaches those who need it most. The Foundation structure is designed to continue without me. Trust Margaret and the team we've assembled. Most importantly, trust yourselves. You were chosen not despite your ordinary background, but because of it. Your practical understanding of how real people live and work is exactly what's needed to make this technology accessible beyond theoretical laboratories." The message continued with specific instructions for activating what Walter called Protocol Daybreak, the coordinated release of selected information to journalists, scientists, and advocacy organizations worldwide. This information package was designed to create maximum public pressure without revealing critical technical secrets. Oliver watched the video with the focused intensity that had become his hallmark. He knew this might happen. He was ready for it. Michael nodded, studying the detailed implementation timeline Walter had prepared. "And he made sure we'd be ready too. Look at this, he's mapped out every step, including the parts we've already completed without even realizing it." The protocol activated automatically when Walter failed to enter a daily security code. By morning, the first wave of information had reached its targets, triggering precisely the public reaction Walter had anticipated. Technology blogs began analyzing the partial schematics, environmental groups highlighted the climate implications, and human rights organizations focused on energy, equity potential. The hashtag #FreeWalterHarrison emerged spontaneously, gathering momentum as the story spread. Margaret's phone call confirmed the impact. It's working exactly as planned. 3 senators have requested briefings on Walter's detention, and the Department of Energy is facing questions they clearly weren't prepared to answer. For the next week, Michael and Oliver balanced immediate crisis management with longer-term planning. The Foundation's secure apartment became their new home as they formally accepted the roles Walter had designated for them, Michael as Director of Implementation and Oliver as Junior Research Associate, a position specifically created to honor the boys' unique contributions. The transition from their former lives happened with surprising speed. Michael requested an extended leave from Carson's auto repair, explaining only that a family situation required his full attention. Oliver's school received documentation for a specialized homeschooling program supported by the Foundation. Their apartment was quietly vacated, essential possessions moved to storage until more permanent arrangements could be made. These practical matters, though necessary, felt almost trivial compared to the monumental task before them. Michael spent hours each day studying the Walter's technical documentation, struggling to bridge the gap between his mechanical knowledge and the revolutionary physics underlying the technology. The learning curve was punishingly steep, filled with concepts that challenged his understanding of how energy worked at fundamental levels. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted one night, staring at equations that seemed impenetrable despite days of study. "Walter's been working on this for decades. I'm just a mechanic." Oliver, looking up from his own studies, offered the perspective that often came more naturally to children than adults. "That's why he picked you, Dad." He said in the video that he needed someone who understands how real things work, not just theories. "You know how to fix things that are broken." This simple truth became their guiding principle as they integrated with the Foundation's small but dedicated team. Walter had carefully assembled this group over years. Engineers, educators, community organizers, and legal experts who shared his vision of energy democratization. Each brought specialized knowledge, but none had Walter's comprehensive understanding of the technology. They needed Michael's practical approach as much as he needed their theoretical expertise. The Foundation's manufacturing facility, a modest operation in an industrial park outside the capital, became Michael's primary focus. Here, prototype units based on Walter's resonance amplification system were being prepared for field testing. The technical challenges were immense, translating laboratory designs into rugged systems that could operate reliably in remote locations with minimal maintenance. This was where Michael's mechanical background proved invaluable. Where classically trained engineers saw theoretical problems, he saw practical solutions based on years of keeping cars running with limited resources. His suggestions for simplifying cooling systems, improving durability, and enhancing serviceability began to earn genuine respect from team members who had initially viewed him with polite skepticism. Oliver, meanwhile, found his own unexpected role. His artistic abilities translated surprisingly well to technical visualization, allowing him to spot patterns and relationships that others missed. More importantly, his natural curiosity led him to ask fundamental questions that often revealed unnecessary complications in Walter's designs. "Why does this part have to be so complex?" he asked during a design review session, pointing to an elaborate resonance chamber configuration. "Couldn't you just make it simpler like this?" His quick sketch showed a streamlined alternative that maintained the critical geometry while eliminating several manufacturing challenges. The senior engineer examined the drawing with initial doubt that transformed into genuine surprise. This might actually work. The resonance pattern would be maintained, but the fabrication would be much simpler. Testing confirmed Oliver's intuition. The simplified design performed at 98% efficiency while reducing manufacturing costs by nearly 30%. This breakthrough became the first of many Oliver optimizations that would accelerate the technology's development path. As their technical work progressed, the campaign to secure Walter's release gained momentum. Margaret's legal team had secured a significant victory, forcing government acknowledgement that Walter was being held under national security provisions. This shifted the battlefield from denial to justification, with officials claiming his detention was necessary to protect sensitive technologies with potential strategic implications. The foundation countered with a coordinated media campaign highlighting the humanitarian potential of Walter's work, featuring the stories of communities that could be transformed through energy independence. This created political space for back-channel negotiations through a sympathetic congressman who had championed renewable energy initiatives. 3 months into their new roles as the first field deployments approached, Michael and Oliver faced their greatest challenge yet. Government representatives made a proposal through Margaret Walter would be released if the Foundation surrendered all technical documentation and prototype devices to a classified research program. The technology would be evaluated for national security implications before any potential civilian applications were permitted. The offer created agonizing conflict. Walter's freedom was their most immediate concern, but accepting these terms would effectively end any hope of implementing his vision of democratized energy. The technology would disappear into classified programs, potentially emerging years later as proprietary systems controlled by the same interests Walter had spent decades avoiding. Margaret presented the offer with characteristic directness during an emergency foundation meeting. They're essentially asking us to choose between Walter and his life's work. There's no legal recourse available that would secure both. The team debated options long into the night, each alternative seeming to sacrifice something essential. As discussions circled without resolution, Oliver, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. What if we gave them some of it, but not all? His suggestion cut through the circular arguments. Doctor, I found. Walter's notes show he made versions that were deliberately simplified, teaching models that demonstrated the principles without revealing the most advanced components. What if we offered those? Michael studied his son's earnest expression, recognizing the seed of a potential solution. You mean give them the basic technology as a good faith gesture while keeping the most advanced implementations? The strategy took shape rapidly. Walter had indeed created simplified versions of his systems specifically for educational purposes. These working models demonstrated the core principles while omitting the breakthrough refinements that enabled maximum efficiency. Releasing these designs would prove the technology's legitimacy while preserving its most revolutionary aspects. Margaret immediately recognized the potential leverage. This creates a middle path. They get verifiable technology with significant value. We get Walter back, and the core mission continues. The counteroffer was carefully constructed. The Foundation would provide functioning demonstration systems and limited technical documentation in exchange for Walter's immediate release and legal recognition of the Foundation's right to develop the technology for humanitarian applications. Government negotiators initially rejected the proposal, insisting on complete technology transfer. But the Foundation held firm, bolstered by growing public support and the strategic advantage that partial disclosure had created. When independent scientists confirmed the validity of the resonance principles from the information already released, pressure mounted on officials to accept the compromise. 4 months after Walter's capture, the breakthrough finally came. A negotiated agreement would secure his release under strict conditions, ongoing government oversight of technology deployment, restrictions on international applications, and regular security reviews. In exchange, the Foundation would receive formal recognition and limited protection from interference. The morning Walter returned to the Foundation headquarters marked a turning point. Though visibly thinner and more fatigued than when they'd last seen him, his spirit remained undiminished. The reunion with Michael and Oliver transcended professional collaboration, carrying the emotional weight of family reunited after separation. They spent 4 months trying to convince me that my technology was too dangerous for public access, Walter explained once they were settled in the Foundation's conference room. The same arguments they've been making for 40 years: national security risks, economic disruption, public safety concerns. What they really fear is loss of control. Energy independence threatens too many power structures, both literal and figurative. Rather than weakening his resolve, the detention had actually strengthened Walter's determination. During his isolation, he had mentally refined aspects of the technology solving problems that had previously seemed intractable. These insights, combined with the improvements Michael and Oliver had developed, created an opportunity to accelerate their implementation timeline substantially. With Walter's return, the foundation entered a new phase. The first field deployments were scheduled for the following month, 10 community installations across 3 states that would demonstrate both the technology's effectiveness and the foundation's commitment to equitable access. The selection process for these initial sites had been rigorous, considering both technical factors and community dynamics. Montana's Blackfeet Reservation topped the list, followed by isolated villages in Alaska and rural communities in Appalachia. Each location had established leadership structures, technical capacity for maintenance, and demonstrated need. More importantly, each had formally committed to the foundation's core principle. Energy generated would remain a community resource, not a privatized commodity. As the first installation date approached, external resistance intensified. An industry-funded think tank published a risk assessment questioning the safety of resonance technology, suggesting potential harmful effects on environmental systems and human health. Though the report contained no substantive evidence, it generated media coverage and regulatory inquiries that threatened to delay deployments. Walter had anticipated such tactics, maintaining comprehensive safety documentation from decades of testing. The Foundation responded with transparent data sharing, inviting independent scientists to review their safety protocols and monitoring systems. This approach effectively neutralized the more reasonable concerns while exposing the ideologically motivated attacks for what they were. Less easily addressed were the economic pressures applied to potential deployment communities. In several locations, utility companies suddenly offered infrastructure upgrades or rate reductions contingent on communities declining participation in the Foundation's program. These tactical concessions, transparently designed to preserve market control, created difficult decisions for communities balancing immediate benefits against long-term independence. To navigate these challenges, the Foundation established a community sovereignty fund, providing financial support to offset short-term economic incentives for maintaining the status quo. This mechanism enabled local leaders to make decisions based on long-term community interests rather than immediate economic pressures. The first installation day arrived with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The Blackfeet Reservation had been selected not only for its demonstrated need, but for the community's strong leadership and commitment to energy sovereignty. The Foundation team, led by Michael and including Oliver as an official participant, arrived with 2 trucks carrying the components for a 10-kilowatt generation system designed to power the community center that served as both administrative hub and emergency shelter. The installation process had been carefully designed to maximize community involvement. Local electricians and maintenance staff worked alongside Foundation technicians, learning the system's operation and maintenance requirements through direct participation. Children gathered to watch the process, asking questions that Oliver often answered with a clarity adults couldn't match. "It's not magic," he explained to a group of curious kids about his own age. "It's just physics that nobody paid attention to because it couldn't make money for big companies. The energy is already there all around us. Dr. Walter just figured out how to collect it and make it useful." After 3 days of collaborative work, the moment of activation arrived without ceremony. Michael connected the final monitoring system. Walter performed a brief diagnostic check, and power began flowing, reliable, clean energy, requiring no fuel producing, no emissions, and belonging entirely to the community it served. The technical success, confirmed by performance metrics that exceeded projections, was significant. But the human impact proved far more profound. For a community that had experienced frequent outages and prohibitive electricity costs, the suddenly abundant, reliable power supply represented not just practical improvement, but a fundamental shift in relationship to essential infrastructure. Energy decisions that had previously been made in distant corporate boardrooms were now locally determined and controlled. News of the successful deployment spread quickly through networks of similar communities, generating requests for information and implementation partnerships. The Foundation's approach, focusing on collaborative deployment rather than traditional product distribution, resonated particularly with communities that had historical reasons to distrust conventional development models. Within weeks, the first data began flowing back from the Montana installation. The system was producing 14% more power than projected, with stability parameters exceeding design specifications. More importantly, the community integration was proceeding smoothly, with local technicians successfully handling routine maintenance and monitoring. For Michael, witnessing the real-world impact of their work transformed abstract mission statements into tangible reality. During a follow-up visit to the reservation, he observed children using computers in the community center, medical equipment operating reliably in the clinic, and community members planning economic initiatives made possible by energy independence. These concrete benefits, lives improved in measurable ways, provided validation more meaningful than any technical metric. Oliver experienced a different but equally profound satisfaction. For a child who had lost his mother and struggled through the resulting disruption, contributing to something permanently beneficial offered a unique form of healing. In his 9-year-old mind, helping communities gain energy independence was connected to his own journey towards stability and purpose, different dimensions of the same fundamental human need for security and meaning. As summer approached, the Foundation's implementation schedule accelerated, with installations completed in 6 additional communities before fall. Each deployment incorporated lessons from previous experiences, refining both the technology and the social integration methods. This iterative improvement process, combining technical and social innovation, became a defining characteristic of the Foundation's approach. The most significant technical breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. While reviewing performance data from the Montana installation, Oliver noticed subtle patterns in power generation that corresponded to environmental conditions. His artistic sensibility, attuned to visual relationships others might miss, recognized that the system was responding to atmospheric pressure changes in ways the design hadn't anticipated. What if it's not just pulling energy from quantum fluctuations, he suggested during a technical review session. What if it's also harvesting energy from weather patterns, and we just never noticed? Walter and the engineering team initially dismissed the observation as coincidental, but further analysis supported Oliver's insight. The resonance systems were indeed interacting with macro-scale energy differentials in the atmosphere, effectively functioning as a previously unrecognized form of environmental energy harvesting. Controlled testing confirmed this dual-mode operation, revealing an entirely new dimension of the technology's potential. By optimizing for both quantum and atmospheric energy capture, they could potentially increase output by 30 to 40% without significant design modifications. This discovery, born from a child's pattern recognition skills, became a defining milestone in the technology's evolution. The Foundation's growing visibility inevitably attracted attention from major energy corporations, several of which approached with acquisition offers for Walter's patents. These proposals, often framed as partnerships that would accelerate global deployment, invariably included provisions that would have centralized control and prioritize profitable applications over humanitarian needs. Margaret handled these overtures with diplomatic firmness, explaining that the Foundation's structure specifically prohibited such transactions. "We're not developing a product for market distribution," she would explain to bewildered executives. "We're implementing a community resource model that fundamentally reimagines energy as a commons rather than a commodity." This stance generated both admiration and resentment within the energy sector. Some forward-thinking companies began exploring how they might authentically collaborate with the Foundation's mission, recognizing the inevitable transformation of their industry. Others deployed increasingly aggressive tactics to undermine deployments, from regulatory challenges to disinformation campaigns, questioning the technology's reliability. Throughout these external conflicts, the Foundation maintained its focus on implementation, recognizing that demonstrated success would ultimately prove more persuasive than any theoretical argument. By late summer, systems operating in 8 communities across 3 states were generating clean, cost-free energy while training local technicians in maintenance and operation. The Foundation's approach to knowledge sharing reflected Walter's philosophy that technological liberation required education alongside implementation. Each community received not just functional systems, but comprehensive understanding of how those systems worked, with training programs designed to develop local expertise rather than dependency on Foundation support. This educational component extended to Oliver's development as well. Though only 9 years old, he was receiving an education that combined conventional academic subjects with specialized technical training structured around his involvement in the Foundation's work. This integration of learning and meaningful contribution created an educational experience uniquely suited to his capabilities and interests. For Michael, the transformation was equally profound. The struggling mechanic who had gambled his last $50 on a tax auction cabin had become the implementation director for revolutionary technology, leading teams, making strategic decisions, and witnessing the direct impact of his work on communities in need. The skills that had once barely kept him employed now formed the foundation of contributions affecting thousands of lives. The cabin on Pine Ridge Road where their journey had begun underwent its own evolution. No longer just a weekend renovation project, it became the Foundation's Field Research Center, with the laboratory expanded and modernized to support ongoing development. The humble structure that had once represented desperate hope for basic shelter now served as headquarters for technological transformation. One unexpected development emerged as the Foundation approached its first anniversary. The financial resources Walter had accumulated, originally projected to support operations for 3 to 5 years, were being preserved through an organic evolution. Communities benefiting from foundation systems had begun voluntarily contributing to a mutual support fund, creating a sustainable financial model that reduced dependency on the initial endowment. This natural progression towards self-sustaining operations embodied the Foundation's core philosophy that energy independence should foster community interdependence rather than isolation. The emerging network of implementation sites was developing collaborative relationships, sharing technical improvements and governance models in ways that strengthened all participants. For Walter, witnessing this development represented the fulfillment of a decades-long vision. During a rare quiet moment at the cabin as they watched the sunset from the now restored porch, he confided in Michael, "I wasn't sure I'd live to see this, not just functional technology, but the social transformation it enables. Communities reclaiming control over essential infrastructure, breaking dependency relationships that have constrained them for generations." Michael understood the depth of meaning behind these words. Walter had spent 40 years not just developing revolutionary technology, but protecting it from those who would weaponize or monopolize it. His persistence through decades of surveillance, interference, and attempted suppression had been sustained by precisely this vision: communities empowered through energy sovereignty. As the Foundation prepared for its first annual gathering, bringing together representatives from all implementation communities for knowledge sharing and collaborative planning, Michael reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. The desperate bid at a county auction, the discovery of Walter's hidden legacy, the decision to accept responsibility for revolutionary technology, each step had led to this moment of demonstrated transformation. The night before the gathering, Michael and Oliver stood on the porch of the restored cabin, looking out over property that now housed not just their home, but a center for ongoing innovation. The clearing where they had first met Walter was now the site of a testing facility for next-generation systems. The spring where they had found the first marker supplied water for laboratory cooling systems. The forest that had concealed Walter's secrets now protected their collective work. Oliver leaned against the porch railing, his expression thoughtful beyond his years. "Remember when we first saw this place, all covered in vines and falling apart? I was scared we couldn't fix it, but I didn't want to tell you." Michael nodded, recalling the mixture of desperation and hope that had defined that moment. "And now look at it, not just fixed up, but doing something important." As evening settled around them, lights became visible through the trees, cars arriving for tomorrow's gathering, carrying representatives from communities across the country. Each vehicle contained people whose lives had been directly improved by the work centered in this once abandoned cabin, people who had experienced the practical liberation of energy sovereignty. Walter joined them on the porch, his silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. The three stood in companionable silence, watching the procession of headlights weaving through the forest toward the clearing that had become the Foundation's gathering space. "You know," Walter said finally, "I spent most of my life working alone, afraid to trust anyone with what I'd discovered. The greatest irony is that the technology only reached its full potential when I finally let others in, when I stopped trying to protect it and started trying to share it." Michael understood this sentiment deeply. His own journey had followed a similar path from isolation after Rebecca's death to connection through shared purpose. In protecting Oliver from disappointment, he had nearly missed the opportunity for both of them to participate in something transformative. As darkness settled completely, the lights from the gathering space illuminated the clearing, creating a warm glow that pushed back against the night. Tomorrow, representatives from 8 communities would share stories of transformation, exchange knowledge, and plan next steps together. The Foundation's second phase would expand to 20 additional locations in the coming year, selected from over 300 applications. For all the technical complexity behind their work, its essence could be expressed in simple human terms. People who had been vulnerable were becoming resilient. Communities that had been dependent were becoming self-determining. A resource that had been commodified and controlled was becoming accessible and abundant. Standing between Walter and Oliver, watching the gathering take shape below, Michael felt the full circle of their journey. The cabin that had cost his last 50 and Rebecca's wedding ring had indeed contained treasure beyond imagination, not just in Walter's technology, but in the purpose it had given their lives, the healing it had brought to their relationship, and the impact it was having on countless others. What had begun as a desperate gamble had become the foundation for transformation. What had been broken was becoming whole. And in that restoration lay the true power of Walter's vision, the understanding that energy wasn't just about power generation, but about human potential, unleashed, about creating spaces where people could build something beautiful from whatever broken pieces life had left them.